All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Thursday again, everybody. We're going to be hitting the rest of the slate from the Christmas Day games. Two games I'm going to do deep dives on, Spurs-Knicks as well as Sixers-Celtics. The other two games I'm just going to give a couple of quick takeaways on before we get out of here today. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. It's also helpful if you leave a rating and a review on that front. We also have brand new social media feeds on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for the Hoops Tonight channel where we're releasing content throughout the year. Make sure you guys follow us there. And then last but not least, keep dropping mailbag questions in those YouTube comments for our Friday mailbags throughout the rest of the season. All right, let's get started. I want to get down to that Mikal Bridges, Victor Wembanyama shootout that we had to start the day yesterday. A couple of really great games to start the day. I want to start with this concept of mid-range rhythm. So Mikal Bridges, we had a couple examples of this last night. Mikal Bridges got crazy hot from the mid-range. Bradley Beal got really hot from the mid-range in the Denver Nuggets game. There's this thing that happens when we talk about the shots in basketball where we focus a lot on the large sample without acknowledging some of the realities of the way basketball games can go that are difficult to quantify, that are things that no sort of mathematical concept would be able to account for. So, for example, if we're listing the types of shots that any player can get in a game, you're going to put mid-range jump shot off the dribble towards the very end, right? The only worse shot than a mid-range jump shot off the dribble is like a smothered, like really heavily contested mid-range jump shot off the dribble. But if we're listing shots, right, like you want like an uncontested rim attempt and then like an uncontested three-point attempt, and then there's various shots that we could get to, but at the very end of that list is going to be that mid-range jump shooting piece, right? And the main reason why is because it's a jump shot, so there's, a chance it's going to miss, a pretty good chance it's going to miss, and two, it's only worth 2 points, right? So when it comes to jump shooting, you want to try to generate as many threes as possible because you make up for the volatility and the variance with that extra point, which is going to manifest in more points in the larger sample. However, for a jump shooter, what's an easier shot? A jump shooter that's comfortable in the mid-range. There are a lot of jump shooters that just don't practice the mid-range at all. I would recommend against that. I think it's important in skill development to be well-rounded. But there is for most shooters that are good shooters, that are balanced, versatile shooters, a little 10, 15-footer is an easier shot than a 25-footer, right? I mean, it's no different than the free throw line, right? Like it's closer to the basket. The rim can fit 2 basketballs in there, right? So like there's quite a bit of margin for error, and the greatest shooters in the world can knock him down from 25 feet. But when you get into a rhythm, that little 10, 15-footer, it's not just a shot you can make. It's a shot you can make over and over and over again. There's a rhythm and flow to basketball. When you generate an open shot, it is not like you pull the slot machine lever and just pray it goes in, right? Like the shot either goes in or doesn't based on a bunch of different factors that extend to the flow of the possession leading into the shot, but also the skill development of the player and whether or not that player is currently feeling very confident and currently trusting his form and in good rhythm with his jump shot. Or like you could run great offense, but the ball can end up in a player's hands who's been slumping pretty bad and is struggling with confidence and doesn't seem to be really comfortable with his form, and that shot might not go in, right? There's all these different factors that go into it. But when it comes down, there's a reason why that mid-range jump shot is still so valuable to the great scorers in this league. It's because in a late game situation, if you are in rhythm and in flow, that's a shot that you feel really good about knocking down. You can get into a rhythm where you knock it down again and again and again. When it comes to three-point shooting, there's a lot more volatility that can come with it. But three-point shooting, ironically, is its own great example because we've seen three-point shooters get hot and make 3 after 3 after 3, right? So now you can imagine that same rhythm and flow that players can get into, but move it in 10 feet, and it just goes to an even greater level. And I thought that was fascinating because, again, like Mikal Bridges again and again down the stretch of that game took shots that in a lot of cases are viewed as bad shots. But it won them a game because it was a shot that Mikal felt comfortable with, and he entered into that zone, and he just wasn't going to miss it. And I think, again, like this is where that concept of basketball being more art than science comes into play. you want to try to target every mathematical advantage that you can. You want to hire as many statistical analysts as you can to be as plugged into the data as you possibly can to gain every little advantage that you can, right? But at the end of the day, basketball has so many factors, so many variables, it is impossible to actually solve. And at the end of the day, you want players playing in flow and you want them playing in rhythm. And that might dictate a different approach than what the numbers might tell you to do. And that's why, again, like when you come into these situations, it's about a balance. It's about a balance between taking as much information as you can, gaining every advantage as you can, but making sure that you have your best players feeling comfortable and in rhythm as possible by not micromanaging every damn shot they take. And I think that's where that balance comes in. I thought that was just such an interesting example. Like, again, that's the difference between mid-range shooting and longer range shooting. You can straight up enter a zone where you're just making it every damn time. And that's what Mikal Bridges did to steal that game from the San Antonio Spurs. I thought Josh Hart was incredible down the stretch of this game. He hit a huge above the break three. The Spurs were guarding a lot of the ball screen actions 3-on-2, meaning like they're chasing over the top. They have the big up at the level, but they also have a third defender that's kind of coming over to guard the action. That's going to cause a lot of off-ball 3-on-2s, which are going to leave open shooters. And Josh had a big one above the break that he ended up hitting. He had a huge offensive rebound on a missed layup missed one of the few mid-range jump. I think it was the mid-range jump shot that Mikal Bridges missed late, where it kind of rattled in and out. And he had Chris Paul on him, Josh Hart did, and Chris Paul was kind of drifting and being a little lazy, and Josh Hart just shot down the lane and got a huge offensive rebound. And then he had a huge block on a low man rotation on Jeremy Sohan. So it's a little ball screen, lob to the rim. Sohan's going up to dunk. He's behind the screen defender, meaning like if the low man help isn't there, it's a dunk or it's a layup. Josh Hart comes flying out of the left corner, makes that huge block at the rim, and then he did another transition push where he drew a foul. Made several huge plays to help them win that game. And then the Knicks got the stops that they needed down the stretch. Again, defense has been the main driving force behind the Knicks' success as of late. A couple of interesting adjustments. They went away from Karl Anthony Towns late. I get it because they were getting burned on some pick and pop stuff, which is typical. That's a coverage that you're going to have to run with Karl Anthony Towns there. And when you switch, you don't love that matchup, leaving Karl Anthony Towns on a guard on the perimeter, right? So like I understand some of it, but also I kind of felt bad for Cat because like Victor was hitting some impossible shots. Like Victor hit multiple like 30 footers or like 26, 27 footers moving, like running into the shot to his right, planting that left foot and that right foot squaring up in midair, knocking like at 7'4", whatever the hell he is, knocking down a movement 27 footer. Like at a certain point, I want to be like, this isn't really your fault. And I mean, there was some good defense down the stretch on Victor, but I mean, he missed a couple good looks too. That's part of the game. But anyway, they go away from Karl Anthony Towns. Tibbs puts Precious Achiuwa on Jeremy Sohan so he can help in the paint. They basically ignore Jeremy Sohan. Jeremy Sohan burned them once with a above the break three on the left wing down the stretch, but for the most part that was working. Then they put OG Anunoby on Victor Wembanyama so that they could get up underneath Wemby to kind of take away any sort of dribble penetration. And that also gives them the flexibility to switch any ball screens that involve Victor Wembanyama because, again, Victor had been beating them in pick and pop. So they got all the stops that they needed to get, and they get out of there with the win. Mikal Bridges finished with 41 points, 0 turnovers. I thought he did an awesome job defensively on Devin Vassell, too. He's just playing so much better than he did to start the year, and it's doing a lot to turn around the Knicks. But again, like with the Knicks, it's coming down to their defense. Like that's how they regained control of the situation yesterday. That's how they were winning games in that 8-2 stretch before this game. Like it's all about them being a defense, like a gritty defense, physical team that has more offensive talent than last year's team did to give them that boost, right? And like that's the difference, right? Like when they went on their run after the Spurs went up big in that middle of the fourth quarter, when they went on their run, it's like defense, running out in transition. OG Anunoby hits a three. Mikal Bridges hits a three. Josh Hart hits a three, right? Like when it wasn't OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, it would have been harder. There wasn't as much talent on the floor to convert those situations, but they have the talent now and they're converting those situations. I thought Deuce McBride made it like a ridiculous, important off the dribble three above the left break as well. Big team win for the Knicks to survive the Victor Wembanyama onslaught. For Victor Wembanyama, just some truly absurd shot making. He had 2 30-footers moving to his right, like we talked about earlier. Couldn't even get mad at Cat. The main thing that stood out to me, and again, like I promise I'm not talking shit here because like Victor's amazing. He was +7 yesterday. They've been dominating in his minutes. He's averaging 30 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists on 51% from the field, 39% from 3, and 87% from the line, with 4 blocks per game in his last 15 games. And the Spurs are 9-6 in those games. And again, like the on-off splits are crazy. But there's one thing that I want to kind of nitpick with him because I think it's something that'll help him down the stretch, and this goes or down the rest of his prime. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Mikal Bridges. On any jump shot for Victor Wembanyama that is not a 3, he's 17 for 53 this season. That's 32%. And again, that's without getting that extra point too. So we're talking about 0.64 points per attempt, which is really, really bad. Again, like he can get hot from 3, and he's won games hitting 3s this year. We talked about, I think he's hit 4 clutch 3s this year in the final 5 minutes of games. But it would be nice to have something that he could go to that is closer. Like, for instance, when he had that face up against Precious Achiuwa and he ripped through to the right and he took that little elbow jumper that rattled in and out. Like, I would love to see Victor get to the point where he has some of those types of over-the-top shots that he can hit closer to 50, 55%, or even 45, 50%, because they're less volatile than the shots that he takes from 3 in the small sample when he's in these clutch time situations. He's also still only made 1 hook shot all season, right? That's one too, where he could just take a bump and turn over his left shoulder and just kind of shoot like a little 5 to 10 foot push shot in that short range where he could get a little bit more reliable scoring. But again, it was like he was super hot from 3. They started taking away the easy ones and he took a couple of tougher ones and they didn't go in. And then there wasn't much for him to go to at that point. So like, I'd like to see him, and this is not just on him, it's on the Spurs as well. They need to try to generate as many opportunities for him to catch with an advantage closer to the rim to look to score instead of always so far from the rim. On the Spurs front, a lot of really positive stuff. Like Chris Paul is doing some really nice work keeping them organized on offense. They're 17 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor versus off this year on both ends of the floor. Part of that is he's partnered with Victor Wembanyama a lot, but also it's that keeping them organized on offense. Again, like a lot of freelance offense ends poorly in the NBA. Having a point guard that gets you into your sets and gets everybody into their spots will go a long way towards increasing your offensive efficiency. You know, Jeremy Sohan, it's interesting. I don't love the idea of having him guard like quicker perimeter players like Mikal Bridges. I didn't think he did a good job against Mikal Bridges late. Too much contact on the screen and not staying attached enough from behind. But some of that is just part of the problem when you're playing the Knicks because someone has to guard Jalen Brunson too, right? And you're going to be put in situations where it's possible that Jeremy Sohan could have to guard another quick perimeter player. But overall, I thought he did a ton of good. He had hit a huge 3 when the Knicks were ignoring him late. He had 21 points on 10 shots, 60% true shooting on 15 points per game over the season. He puts the ball in the basket more effectively than I think a lot of people realize. They've been tinkering with that 5th guy in those lineups. So obviously, you've got Devin Vassell with Chris Paul, with Jeremy Sohan and Victor Wembanyama kind of feels like that core 4. And sometimes it's Steph Castle is the 5th guy. Sometimes it's Keldon Johnson when they want to be more athletic. And then like yesterday, a lot of Julian Champagnie because they're trying to get more shooting in there. And that's the kind of thing that'll bear out in time as they kind of get some more clarity among their young talent and whether or not they end up making some more a type of all-in type of move at some point in the future. But the 2 big things that stood out to me for the Spurs in this game is their defensive details, like a lot of overhelping, like a lot of times where they're defending ball screens 3-on-2 and leaving shooters open when they probably don't need to. And then missing box outs, like they got beat on the glass a bunch late, and a lot of it was just not attentive and not competing for loose balls. So like little things they need to clear up. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, trying to find more opportunities for Victor Wembanyama to catch with an opportunity to score closer to the rim. And again, that's a skill development piece for Victor too, because he's got to be able to convert those opportunities, but try to keep him from floating around the 3-point line late in games. That's not to say you shouldn't do it. And I think it's important, like if you get a really good guard that you trust late, whether it's Devin Vassell, Chris Paul, or it's Steph Castle in a few years, you want to have a release valve for that guard to be able to work, but then also feel like Victor is a threat out of the perimeter to maintain spacing. But you also want to, like in his ISO situations and his post-up situations, try to run stuff to get him closer to the basket so that he's less tempted to settle for really tough contested like 18-footers and maybe more like 10 to 12-footers that have a little bit less variance involved with them. It's the most wonderful time of the year for getting in on all of the hoops, football, and hockey action at DraftKings Sportsbook. In the season of giving, we're being gifted college football and basketball, pro football and basketball, and pro hockey too. Almost 24/7. So many games every day, so many opportunities to place your first bet. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and place your bet. Current Super Bowl winners on DraftKings right now, the Detroit Lions at plus 260 and the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 425. And here's a gift for all new customers. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Happy holidays from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Moving on to Sixers-Celtics. Not a game plan mistake, but a game plan backfires for Boston. Game plans are designed to take away things that teams like to do and force teams to do things that make them feel uncomfortable. One of the things that the Celtics have done forever is put their Celtics on the weakest above-the-break shooter on the opposing team. Why? Because Jayson Tatum is big and strong enough to battle centers, and so is Jaylen Brown. But both of them are also quick enough to guard on the perimeter. So you could put Jaylen Brown on the best pick and roll ball handler for the other team, and Jayson Tatum on their center. All of a sudden, their 1-5 ball screen game or whatever their best perimeter player ball screen game is just shut down because it's just a switch and there's not a great mismatch on either side of it, right? And then above and beyond that, you've got your center, the rim protector, lingering around the basket while you're leaving this mediocre to bad jump shooter standing around on the perimeter. That guy yesterday was Caleb Martin. Caleb Martin is shooting before last night's game, or yesterday's game, I should say, 18 for 59 from three before that game, 30.5%. And again, this is a strategy that works the majority of the time for the Celtics. Caleb Martin goes 7 for 9 from three yesterday. The Celtics had a small lead early in the fourth quarter. Caleb Martin hits 4 threes, all on the right wing, all during that massive run that Philly goes on where they take control of the game. Tyrese Maxey was incredible in that game as well. I thought he played the best out of anybody. I thought he was the best player on the floor in yesterday's game. He hit several big shots in that run. On defense, the Celtics were trying to go at him. He had a big stop against Derek White on a drive. He had like a steal where he defended a slip, where like a lot of times when you're hedging and recovering, if you recover with high hands, you can get deflections as that pass is trying to get back to the guy you were originally guarding. He got a big steal doing it that way. He was awesome. The Sixers go up by 15. So the game plan basically backfires. Your entire game plan's built on, we're going to let Caleb Martin take these above the break threes because he's hitting them at less than 33%. So they're worth less than 1 point per possession. We're going to shut down this primary action and the Sixers will fall apart. He hits 4 threes in that stretch. Suddenly it's a very, very different type of game, right? But then the Celtics go on a huge run. Classic Celtics basketball. They turn up their ball pressure. They start forcing turnovers. They start getting stops. Playing simple offense on the other end with great spacing to generate wide open threes. They get a steal. Jaylen Brown gets a steal with more ball pressure on Tyrese Maxey that leads to a run-out dunk for Al Horford. Suddenly it's a 3-point game. But then Joel Embiid, who had been on the bench during this run, came in and made 2 huge plays to kind of reassert control. Catches on the roll and makes a good, hard, strong move off of a power dribble into the lane and draws a foul. Makes both free throws. That puts the lead back up to 5. And then in a late clock situation, he blocks Jayson Tatum at the rim, which forces Al Horford into kind of a late clock heave that doesn't go in. So 2-way sequence from Embiid where he gets 2 points and defends the rim on the other end. All of a sudden, the Sixers have the ball up by 5, and they're able to kind of reassert control of the game. Big time play. That's what you're supposed to do. Again, like that's the thing with Embiid. There's going to be, I thought he was really good yesterday, but like there's going to be times where in this process where as he's trying to get his legs underneath him and get back in rhythm, he's not the all-world MVP type of Joel Embiid, right? Like that's a player that I expect in a few weeks after he gets several games under his belt without having any issues, right? But a lot of times it's like you just got to make some plays. And again, like your team puts you in position to win with a great run to start the fourth quarter, but they're starting to lose control because guess what? They're not as talented as the team they're playing, and they need you, your superstar, to come in and make a couple plays to help them reassert control, and that's exactly what they did. It's been tough to get a read on the Sixers with all the injuries they've dealt with this year. Like we have just 225 possessions of those 3 guys all on the floor together this season, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid. They're plus 1.3 net, meaning plus 1.3 points per 100 possessions so far in those 225 possessions. a 101 defensive rating, which is awesome, but a 102 offensive rating, which is pretty bad. That's to be expected, though. There's two reasons why. One, like Paul George and Joel Embiid need to be on the floor so that they can get into a rhythm, so that they can get to the best versions of themselves. Like right now, the big three is out there, but it's not the idealized version of the big three. The idealized version of the big three is the big three that's played 20 games and all three guys are healthy, in rhythm, in shape. That's the version of the big three that could potentially be, plus 12, plus 13 points net rating over a pretty large sample. That's what I want to see in the long run. But like the second piece of it too is like the actual learning how to play with each other. Like, again, this is a new partnership. And again, like how is Paul George going to fit in alongside these guys? And so like, again, he was off the ball for a lot of Embiid Tyrese action late in the game, right? So like, that's where you got to find ways to kind of keep him involved. Like all of that will grow in time as they get more repetitions. But again, they're in a good spot, all things considered. You could not have scripted a more disastrous start to the season for the Philadelphia 76ers. And they're now 3.5 games back from being above the play-in, so that's the 6th seed, with Miami, Atlanta, Indiana, Chicago, and Detroit standing in their way. You feel good about your chance to outpace those teams in the big picture. They're capable of it. And now you're coming off of a huge win on the road in Boston. It's a good spot to be for the 76ers. On the Boston front, they've lost 4 out of 7 now. Like I always say, everyone in this league, even the best teams, will have ugly stretches in their season. It is a part of the deal when you're playing 82 games. The Celtics actually had a stretch right around the same time last year where they lost 3 out of 6. It was in early January. So when they lost to Oklahoma City, lost to Indiana, and then they got blown out by the Bucks in a 6-game span. Then they went on to win the championship, right? So this is part of the deal when you're playing 82. What's happening this time, though? 1, too many stretches of lazy defense. They had a 116 defensive rating in these 4 losses, which isn't bad, but it's bad by Celtic standards. A lot of sequences like you saw in that fourth quarter where like the team isn't really pressuring the ball and isn't really competing defensively on the perimeter and they get sliced and diced. Then they find themselves down big. Then they like ratchet up the defense, like they ratchet up that physicality, that ball pressure, and they start really competing. And they immediately start getting stops again, and they go on their run. And so, again, it's like that's where you just need to try to like make it so that the second part of that happens more than the first part of that, right? Like it's like kind of a tale of two different teams within the scope of even individual games. And so that's a big part of it, just competing on defense. Like last night, they turned up the ball pressure after the Sixers went up 15 and immediately regained control of the game. And in both the Chicago game and this game, the Chicago game they lost and this game, they just didn't bring the necessary defensive pressure, especially in that early fourth quarter stretch where they lost control of the game. 2, poor shooting. In this 4 losses, they're shooting 30% from 3. That's obviously going to be something that lessens your chances. And then lastly, Jalen Brown is playing poorly by his standards at this point. He had 5 turnovers in the Memphis game that they lost. He was 1 for 8 from 3 in the Bulls game that they lost, 10 for 23 with 5 more turnovers in the Philly loss. And again, in those defensive stretches where they lost control in the early fourth quarter against Chicago and Philly, kind of very similar types of games where they're in it and then suddenly they just quickly lose control over a bad stretch of defense. I thought Jalen Brown was part of the problem defensively in those roles. Specifically in the Chicago game, it was like one of the more embarrassing defensive efforts I've seen from Jalen Brown in his career. So like Jalen Brown's not playing very well. The team's not shooting very well. They're kind of inconsistent defensively. They dropped 4 out of 7. So what does this mean? Nothing. The great teams have bad stretches too. They just usually wake up from them and get back on track much quicker than everyone else does. Go beat Indiana twice. Got 2 home games against Indiana. They have a 4-game road trip in early January where they go to Minnesota, to Houston, to Oklahoma City, and to Denver. That's a great chance. Go 3-1 on that road trip. You've reasserted yourself as the best team in the league and you kind of regain your mojo. That's what I expect them to do over the course of the next couple of weeks. Again, on Mavs Wolves and on Nuggets Suns, I'm just going to give 2 quick takeaways from each game for time's sake. Mavs Wolves, first takeaway. Ant had these 2 big buckets late, like kind of like a driving little contested bank shot around the right lane line and then a hard driving left-handed layup on PJ Washington late. And all I could say is those were situations where Ant demonstrated his absurd physical gifts with his ability to get to his spots, right? Like Ant just toasts PJ Washington off the dribble for that left-handed layup. And if you watch a replay, that little bank shot that he hit, He's so under control. It almost looks like he's in slow motion. It looks so comfortable and it looks easy, right? And all I could think is, God, I'd love to see this team play with some real spacing. I pulled this number yesterday. The Wolves front court, so they're 3-4-5, is making 2.9 threes per game combined on, what's the percentage that I have here? Hang on one second. 33.9%. 33.9% with less than 3 makes per game. For your entire 3-4-5. So the 3 biggest players, the 3 guys that the other team has their biggest, best athletes on, don't have to worry about them beyond the 3-point line. There's all of this talk. And like, look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Ant is the best playmaker in the world. He's not. Or that he's the best game manager in the world. He's not. Or that Ant doesn't need to get better at reading defenses and making teams pay with his passing. Of course he has to get better at that. He's 22 years old. But the spacing is goddamn awful. It's awful. It's very hard to play basketball in that type of situation. He's having to slalom, in many cases, through 3, 4, 5 bodies just to get to the rim. And this isn't like the old days with illegal defense, right? Like, it's more congested in the lane when you beat that guy off the dribble. And so it's just, it's one of those things where, like, what's going to end up happening, in my opinion, and by the way, I think people are too quick to write Ant off in general just because of this busted-ass Timberwolves roster. And I think he's going to have great moments sooner than later. But there's a version of this where Ant's 26 and he's playing on a team that provides like legitimate spacing for him. And he's made the development steps that he needs to as a playmaker, where I think this dude's going to be absolutely incredible. It blows my mind how easily he gets to his spots. And I thought that those 2 big buckets that he got late were great examples of that. On the Mavs front, they're going to be fine. Luka Doncic leaves on crutches. He's got a significant calf strain. Let's say he's gone for a month. One of the big things that I've learned in the early part of this season is that this Mavs roster is incredibly deep with just good basketball players. And they have so many. This is where making that change this summer and bringing in all that additional ball handling will reap benefits. Because you've got great defensive personnel, and you guys have seen so many examples of this like Lively Gafford center partnership with PJ Washington and how they can really defend. You saw stretches last night where you include Maxi Kleber in that, and they defend even better. They've got all this defensive personnel to bring the defensive floor up. And then now you've got all these additional ball handlers, Spencer Dinwiddie, Najee Marshall, Klay Thompson, guys that can create offense, Quinn Grimes too, that can create offense with movement shooting and off the dribble shot creation. And so that has allowed the defensive floor for the Mavs was already sky high, but now you've raised the offensive floor. Whereas in the old days when you had all this like one-way personnel and Luka is out, it's a much bigger issue creating shots. It's a lot more pressure on Kyrie. Now it kind of feels like more of a natural kind of like basketball team in the sense that you still are relying a lot on Kyrie, but you have other guys that can kind of create offense. And so obviously a discouraging loss. You never want to lose on Christmas Day. You never want to see your star go down with an injury, but I remain confident that the Mavs are fine. I would have Luka take his sweet time to get 100% healthy before he comes back. I think the Mavs are going to stay afloat in the standings on the strength of their talent and their really high floor on both ends of the floor. Nuggets Suns, again, two quick takeaways. First one, the Suns just need to compete physically. They had lost 6 out of 8 before last night's win against Denver. They had a defensive rating of 122 in those 8 games, and they were bad on the glass and bad in transition in that stretch. Last night, they held the Nuggets to 3 straight 22-point quarters. They held up tougher on the glass than they had been as of late. They didn't turn the ball over, and they kept Denver out of transition. That matters even more than getting the guys healthy. Like, you want to have Devin Booker back. You want to have everyone healthy. You want to have the big 3 working and doing their thing. But the more important thing is they just need to compete as a team. Again, when I see defensive ratings that high, when I see teams like when I see middle of the pack teams that have personnel weaknesses, it means to me they're competing. When I see personnel weaknesses, but they're at the bottom of the pack, that tells me you're not competing. And like, you see it last night, they do, and suddenly everything looks that much better. They have to compete. They are not big or athletic enough at any position group to let go of the rope competitively. This is a team that has to fight. Then their offensive talent can be enough to lift them over the top. but it's a non-negotiable. A 122 offense or defensive rating over 8 games, that's not a team that's serious. That doesn't mean they need to be an elite defense, but they have to be better than what they showed in that original stretch. And I thought last night was a great example of that. When the Suns compete physically, they give themselves a really good chance to win. Bradley Beal, by the way, another great example of what I was talking about earlier with Mikal Bridges. I thought he was great all night. Brought a great rim pressure, but he got a little rhythm with his mid-range shot making, and that carried the Suns through various stretches of that game. It was an interesting example, like we talked about earlier at the when we were talking Knicks Spurs. On the Nuggets front, the Nuggets go as Jamal Murray goes. Obviously, goes for 13 points yesterday against the Suns, and they can't score. They are 4-0 this season. In the 4 games, Jamal Murray scored at least 25 points. They are 7-3 when he scores at least 20. They are 4-8 when he fails to score 20. And that really is the thing. Jokic is the consistent force for this team. Jamal Murray is the volatile force. Jamal has to bring stability. When he does, that's when Denver will take off. And until he does, they're going to struggle. It was a game they couldn't score, and they didn't really have an option that they could go to outside of Nikola Jokic. So just something to keep in mind as we look forward to the season. Again, 7-8 when he scores at least 7-3 when he scores at least 20, 4-8 when he fails to score 20. That's the big, kind of oscillating factor for this Denver Nuggets team. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for rocking with me and supporting the show. We'll be back tomorrow with a mailbag. I will see you guys then.